Udarate atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayet atmaiva yatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. So the mind is a material thing for those who are engaged within a material body. It is one of the 8 material elements, separated material elements of the Lord. Bhumira pondalo vayu kammanobadiri vacha ankara itiyame bina prakatira shida. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These 8 are my separated material energies. So, people generally have a difficult time understanding what the mind is. Although there is some field of study, psychic activity, mental capacity, there's some study of it, but often they think they are the mind. Those who are a little more advanced than the gross materialists, or the gross, shall we say, thinkers, or not thinking very much, non-thinkers, the ones who are not thinking, they just assume, of course they're the body. Just like an animal. An animal just assumes automatically that he's the body. If he has a body of a dog, he assumes I'm a dog. And there's no further consideration. So, but in the human species, there are those who do think a little bit more, and they think that they are the mind. I think, therefore I am. That's a René Descartes, I think, said that. So that's a sign of thinking he's considering. But it's not that I am just because I have a mind. It's I am, I exist because even subtler than the mind. In other words, there's some more subtle stages of existence. The anamoya, pranamoya, manamoya, considering that one is this mind. But higher than that, there's Gyanamoya, where one is on the intellectual platform, and then Vijnanamoya, even higher still, self-realization, and then Anandamoya, the ecstatic principle of love of Krishna. These are further realizations of our identity, who I am. And Bhagavad Gita is the ultimate study on one's identity, or ego, or true ego and differentiation between the mind, the intelligence. Intelligence is higher than the mind, Krishna says, because the intelligence gives direction what is right and what is wrong, whereas the mind is superior to the five senses, the eyes, the ears, and sense of touch, sense of smell. It gathers data from these different sense organs and is able to somewhat assemble them so that it makes some sense, not scrambled. It's like we're able to recognize what we're seeing. We're seeing from two different eyes. And each eye is a separate entity, not entity, but it's a separate instrument that brings in an image. But the mind is able to take the two images, superimpose them, and come up with something that makes sense. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to make out what the two different images are. They wouldn't overlap. It would be simply two separate images. But the mind is able to do that. But the mind is not able to decipher what to make of that. Okay, so this is, let's say with our eyes we see an automobile. All right, so we can understand this is an automobile. But then what to do with the automobile? How do we deal with it? And that's intelligence. But then higher than the intelligence is understanding who am I? What one's identity or what one's ego is. So that's the ego, ahamkara. That's very subtle because he has to recognize that I'm not this intelligence. I'm not the mind. I'm not the body. But I'm something else. Now, in biology, they're also struggling with this, trying to figure out what we are. But they have a very difficult time because they're not accepting Bhagavad Gita. They rule out anything beyond what their mind can conceive or their intelligence can conceive. Therefore, they rule out the possibility of there being something beyond intellect. But in actuality, there is something, and that's the ego. And because they don't know that there's several things more subtle than intelligence. One is the ego, ahamkara. Even more subtle than the ego of understanding who one is, or what one is the realization of what one is. Not just that I'm not this body, that I'm something beyond that, but that I'm a spiritual entity. I'm a spiritual being and I'm a person. Not just spirit, something beyond or inconceivable. Certainly the spirit is inconceivable. That's why the scientists, the best thinkers in the world, have not been able to discover it by their exploration and their experiments and their speculation, because it's beyond that. That's why they can't get it. However, it's inferred by those who have some spiritual blessings. It requires spiritual blessings to be able to accept that there's something beyond what I can conceive. It's a great sign of arrogance to say, to declare that if I cannot conceive it, it doesn't exist. And that's what they say. In fact, that's what modern science is based on, this principle. Anything beyond what man can conceive or scientists can conceive, because only scientists really are intelligent. So anything beyond what we can conceive must be just imagination. And this is the way they judge anything, any kind of a proposition that presents that life or the individual could be something other than matter. Because it just doesn't exist by definition, by a scientific definition. It's beyond our conception, cannot exist. Why? Because we are the intellect. That's as far as it goes. So therefore they're restricted. All their scientific endeavors will leave them with many unanswered questions, many unanswered theories. All the theories will be unproven about the existence of the person. Consciousness. How will they define consciousness? They say, well, it's a product of the brain, because they're dealing with gross matter, so they think it's brain. And then now they're seeing some limitations, so they're exploring the possibility that there could be something more subtle, even than intelligence, than the brain, DNA. But as far as I know, I've heard from scientists that DNA they consider to be also matter and also physical. Because if it's not physical and it's not matter, then it means we're assigning some non-physical, non-material attributes to it, which means basically we've gone beyond something conceivable. Now you're talking about something inconceivable. What is it? Because you can't define what it is. You say, well, it's DNA. That's just, you give a name to it. DNA is that thing that we don't understand what it is. And that it seems to be the essence of the entity. So then you're just giving, instead of the name Atma, you're giving the same attributes to DNA as the Bhagavad Gita gives to the Atma, which is nice, because those are correct attributes. That this is something, the individual identity. But then you're dealing with something beyond matter. But you said that DNA is in every atom. It's in every cell. They say it controls every cell. And that it deteriorates, it changes. Well, that's a problem. Because if it changes, and I've changed my body since I was a little child, that means, have I changed? Am I different persons? If I'm different persons, how do I remember things that happened to me when I was in a different body? Well, it becomes very mystical. That's the problem, is it becomes mysterious and mystical. And science can't deal with the mystical. except in its own terms. And then it defines the terms and then restricts them. But actually, they're confused and they're stymied, puzzled how to explain consciousness. So this is the point is that experimentation, observation, speculation, these things are limited. They can only take us so far. The best that Anuman inference can bring us is to the point of assuming that there's something beyond matter. And that's where the impersonalists, they're better than the karmis. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that they're called gyanis because they have knowledge. They have knowledge that there's something beyond matter that we can perceive. But they don't know exactly what it is, but they assume that it's Brahman. It's great. It has intelligence. Brahman means full of intelligence. So that's very good. Out of many koti karmi madhye eka jnana shrestha. Out of tens of millions of karmis, in other words, fruitive workers, one jnani or one even impersonalist is better than all tens of millions of, because he's thinking, he's more intelligent. But out of millions and millions of jnanis, manushanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye. Yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mam veti tatvata. Out of many millions of jnanis, who are not just speculators, but who have actually realized their Brahman nature, even liberated, still one devotee of Krishna is very rare. So we can just see how meager is the realization of modern science. It's not even up to the level of the impersonal realization. So, Bhagavad Gita is the graduate study of all fields of knowledge. Anything that we have that we can call knowledge in any field or any discipline of obtaining knowledge, Krishna consciousness is the graduate and postgraduate study of that. Because we're using mechanics beyond the mechanics that they have access to, beyond the mind, beyond the senses, beyond the intelligence, into the ego and real ego. They might agree that the conception of us being this body is the ego, but they wouldn't agree that there's something beyond that, a real ego, different than made of matter. And therefore they vainly try to prove or postulate that the self is nothing more than the combination of chemicals, chemical evolution. Life comes from chemicals. Star creatures The Big Bang means that there was a chunk that came out of the void, and then it exploded accidentally, and then in due course of time it naturally evolved into becoming living entities. This is how the theory goes, but there's simply no evidence for it. It's lacking any evidence whatsoever. There's no evidence of anything, of void. There's no evidence of voids producing universes. There's no evidence of universes coming out of voids, then exploding by accident, and then by the explosion of these such things, that then very highly, very advanced creatures come about that have, certainly they have intelligence, otherwise how could one become a scientist? So they would have to agree that humans, living beings, have intelligence, but all this comes from the void, and accidents and natural laws without lawgivers, and so it really is a problem. So they have to keep creating new words to define phenomenons that they can't explain. They're very good at that. We have new word, quarks, gluons, just give it different words, and that'll pacify everyone, because they have to. No one wants to admit that they don't know what the words mean. So we all go along. Yes, it's the quarks and the gluons. It's the DNA. The DNA is the solution. And if DNA is not enough, then obviously you mix in the Doppler theory. Yeah, and gluons and quarks and molecules, and then that's the answer. With the third law of thermodynamics. And then if someone tries to unravel that, and they say, you're just not a scientist. So this is what's going on. And everybody's kind of going along with it because they're earning their living from, they've gotten their degrees and they're earning a living in this field. They're teaching it, and if it turns out to be proven that it doesn't have any substance, then how are they going to maintain their household, family? It's very difficult. So everybody has to go along with it. But Krishna doesn't go along with it. And the devotees of Krishna, they're not interested in these baseless, non-provable theories. Because what Krishna says makes sense to one who's getting higher knowledge, higher intelligence. Lower intelligence, yes, the animals, you can't say an animal doesn't have intelligence, or a plant. They have intelligence, but it's restricted to eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. A spider, for example, is brilliant at creating different kinds of stress webs and knows how to knows exactly where to put some kind of a binding together, and he knows what angle to put it at, where to sit, even. But it's all based on eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. He's not actually a real yogi. He may look like a yogi, he's meditating. He's practicing pranayama, he's not moving, fixed, samadhi. But his samadhi is, he's just meditating, fly. Bloody fly. When the fly comes in, I'll spring into action, I'll wrap him up, bind him up. He knows exactly what he'll do. He's meditating. And so he doesn't miss a moment. So in other words, he has intelligence. You can't say there's no intelligence. But his intelligence is limited to the level of the body. I am this body. I am the false ego. He's on that platform. But those who have tapped in to a higher level of intelligence, they can go beyond, and they can get realizations that cannot be, they're inconceivable to the mundaners. And Krishna gives the solution. How does one tap in to the higher intelligence? Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam tadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupiyantite. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give them the understanding by which they can come to me. That buddhi that they get is higher than the buddhi that the spiders get or the scientists get, because that's limited. It's a material buddhi. It's not real buddhi. Real buddhi means, real knowledge means to understand the difference between matter and spirit and the controller of both. So, Atma Gyan. When we speak of knowledge or Gyanis, they're called Gyanis because they understand the Atma to some degree, not perfect understanding, but partial. Therefore, they may be awarded the term Gyani, Atma Gyani, or Brahmavadi. They understand Brahma to some extent. But they only understand a portion because they do not follow what Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam, always engage in my service. They don't accept that. They don't accept that there's a supreme being. They believe that there's some one energy, superior energy, which everything is, but they don't consider that energy to be personal. It's impersonal. But yet it doesn't make sense because everything that we have produced has been a product. Even our ability to perceive it is perceived through our personality. And we take credit that because we're able to perceive something, that means we're persons with higher intelligence. How is it that something personal could kind of come out of something impersonal? Because we see that personal attributes are superior to impersonal attributes. They have more data. Anyone knows, even if you do some desktop design, publishing, that if you just take a bland one color, it has less data to display it than if it has all kinds of complicated things. So the more varieties there are, the more data is required to display it, and to what to speak of understand it, explain it, realize it, utilize it. So, how is it? Janmadhyasya yataha. Therefore, the Vedanta Sutra begins with that aphorism. Janmadhyasya yataha. That everything emanates from that Supreme Brahman. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural explanation of that verse, Janmadhyasya yataha. Therefore it begins, Janmadhyasya yaton vayaditara, explaining what is the source of everything. And there also, the scientists are looking for the origin, but they're looking with blunt instruments. And therefore they keep coming short. They can't actually find it. Looking through little childish telescopes, and they see something and then they speculate what it means. So we're not interested in this. The Bhakti yogis are the greatest scientists, they're the greatest thinkers. They're far, far superior even to the Jnanis, what to speak of the material thinkers. They go beyond molecules, they go beyond the mind, go beyond the intelligence. They go to the Atma. This is the great. And then not only beyond the Atma, they go to the Paramatma. That there's living beings. Otherwise, how can you explain how a little tiny microscopic germ can have the symptoms of consciousness? How would you explain that? It's different than matter. You have to admit that there's something different between a lump of matter that doesn't have consciousness and one that does, that reproduces, that grows, that has offspring, that is born, that has a self-identity, thinks of it itself, tries to protect itself. Matter doesn't protect itself, it doesn't grow, it doesn't reproduce. All these things are simply problems for the speculators and those who are trying to understand it with experimentation and pratyaksha, direct perception. Therefore, the Vedic thinkers, the Bhakti yogis, are the greatest thinkers because they have everything together. It's all coming from one supreme being who has complete intelligence. He knows everything. Past, present, and future. He's all pervasive. He's omniscient. Andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam. He's all pervasive. He's in every atom. He's controlling. He's the supreme controller. He has all power. He's all compassion. He's all good. Everything he does is perfect and good. There's no mistakes. We were discussing today how he has designed a perfect system that everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Just imagine, trillions of living entities, and then you create this virtual world for them to occupy and interact with each other. And each action has to be exactly calibrated according to what the person deserves. And it continues for millions of chapters of life and then rebirth. It's so complex. He doesn't make mistakes. Everyone gets exactly what they deserve. There's nothing to criticize him, but still they criticize God. Why do bad things happen to good people? And they say, well, it's just too complex for him. He couldn't figure it out. He's doing the best he can. But actually, he has everything completely under control, and in order to tap into the higher knowledge, we have to get his mercy, his blessings. Just like, for example, Einstein, he was considered to be a great scientist. So, how do we know what Einstein was thinking? Because he revealed it. He gave us his theories, he explained it, he demonstrated it, he proved it, and therefore we can understand to some degree. And only a very arrogant person would say, I understand as much as Einstein or more. But generally we would say, yes, because he kindly revealed some of it, we can understand some. So that's the principle of the descending process. That you can understand things which are inconceivable by the grace of the inconceivable who reveals it. And then you can understand things that for others are not possible to understand. Because they're not privy. They don't have the password. They can go in and they can type everything, and they're right at the right page, but there's that one part where it says, enter your password. I don't know the password. Okay, you don't get in. You don't get into the spiritual world. You can't enter into that advanced world, that spiritual world, unless you have the password. And the password, Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvak, who worship me with love. So where's the worship? Where's the service? Where's the love? That's the password. And you can go on forever licking the jar of honey. Licking the jar of honey means lick it from the bottom, from the side, lick it standing on your head. But you'll never taste what the honey is, because you're missing the password, and that is to open the jar and go inside and take. And that missing the password is missing the service and loving devotion, worship. That's Bhakti Yoga, that's Krishna consciousness. And that's what opens the door to all the realizations that everyone's trying to get in every field, but are unable, are frustrated. Just imagine. Just like a musician, he's trying to find the ultimate sound. The musicians, they're going on and on. If I could just combine the sounds of this, and if I could take ultra frequencies, and I could go to higher frequencies, higher and lower, lowest frequency, the highest frequency, the sound, vibrating on different, and then I could and from the sound, then I could create, yes, they have some inkling, but they can't get it. Om, because they don't know Om. That's vibrations, Krishna says, Pranava Sarva Vedeshu. I'm the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. Shabdake Purusham Nashu. I'm the syllable. I'm the sound of ether. So, in any field, whether it's music, or philosophy, or religion, or morality, or chemistry, microbiology, any field, it brings you to the threshold, and then it leaves you with void. Because you don't know where it all comes from. You don't know where it's going, how it's coming about. Whereas if you take the process of Bhakti Yoga or Krishna consciousness, then you come to, yes, Krishna. Krishna is the source of music, the source of sound, the end of all music, the end of all vibrations, the end of all sound, the end of all beauty, the end of all morality, the end of all truth, and the end of everything, the origin, the middle, and the end. And he's personal, and he's your friend, and you can have even the most intimate relationship with him beyond conception. Not just like we have we're very proud of our relationships. You know, I have my wife, and I have my children, I have my grandchildren, but that's very short term. What about an eternal relationship? And we're always so careful in our relationships that, you know, someone doesn't step on my identity. I have my space, don't get into my space, otherwise you'll ruin the relationship. Krishna is willing to let you trample over his space, and still he's ready to remain your eternal friend and lover and relationship. Eternally and as much as you like. So, this is what we're dealing with. This is the finest knowledge, the highest knowledge in every possible way. And if you're a scientist or a musician or whatever you are, you will obtain unlimited satisfaction once you enter into this realm of the transcendental realm. But you have to be put aside the conceptions and misconceptions that you have, limitations. If someone wants to cross a river, he sees people on the other side, they say, yes, come over. You can enjoy like us, come across the river. He says, but I'm holding these big bag of stones. What do I do? They say, put them, leave them behind, you don't need them over here. It's not required, but he's so attached, he tries to take the stones with him and then he drowns. He can't get across. So our material attachments are restricting us. We have to give up the material attachments. So any comments, questions?
Maharaj, on your last point about giving up the material attachments, Krishna is saying here, Srila Prabhupada is saying in the purport, because the mind is entangled with the sense objects, he becomes degraded. One becomes degraded. But the relationship of the mind with the sense objects is natural, the material mind that is at least. We naturally think of the sense objects. We live in a world of sense objects.
Yes, but he's thinking that the objects are there for me to enjoy. That's the problem. The ego is wrong. He's thinking he's an enjoyer, and therefore everything he sees, he wants to enjoy it. Instead of what his real ego is I'm a servant. Ekale Ishvara Krishna Arasa Brija. My position is servant eternally. Aham Brahmasmi Jivara Surabhaya Nityara Krishna Das. So whenever he perceives something, he should think, instead of I will enjoy it, he'll say, I'll employ it. I'll employ it in Krishna's service. When a man sees a beautiful flower, he thinks, what a beautiful flower, I'll give it to my girlfriend. And when a devotee sees a beautiful flower, he thinks, I'll engage it in Krishna's service, I'll give it to Krishna. Who is the enjoyer? Because he's thinking, I'm the enjoyer of my girlfriend, therefore I'll give her the flower, and then I'll enjoy her more because she'll be happy with the flower. So I'm still the enjoyer. Even though I'm giving it for her enjoyment, it's not really for her enjoyment. It's for my enjoyment. If I don't give it to her, then she won't give me the pleasure that I want. So that's the mistake. Mistaken identity. Misunderstanding of who or what we are. It all comes back to Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita is the ABCs of Vedic knowledge. It's not even the most advanced. Beyond Bhagavad Gita we have Srimad Bhagavatam, and then beyond that we have Chaitanya Charitamrita. So it goes very vast, very far. Any other points?
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a nice class, Maharaj. So the material scientists, they say we can't believe anything that we can't perceive. But isn't it true that the mind is, to one sense, kind of metaphysical and is kind of inconceivable because we can't see thoughts? There's no machine to hear thoughts or see thoughts. So how can they argue that?
Well, they believe in waves and vibrations and things that you can't see, that you can perceive with other instruments, with finer instruments. But there's finer instruments that they haven't conceived yet. And that's the point, that if they want to perceive them, they won't be able to perceive them with the mind because the mind is less fine. Something more gross can't conceive something that's more subtle. So they have to work then with the most subtle element to understand more subtle elements in the mind, and the subtle element is the soul. The soul has to have some faith, and they hate that word. Although they have faith in their theories without questioning, but they hate it when we use the word faith. And I had a discussion with a scientist once. We were going to have a debate discussion, so we were beginning, and he said, one thing before we begin. I said, yes, what's that? He said, don't bring God into this discussion. Now, he could bring all kinds of theories based on faith, but I couldn't bring in the theory that there might be a divine supreme person who's created everything and maintains everything. He didn't want that. So this is their bias.
Maharaj, thank you for your very wonderful class. You explained so nicely how it's implausible that something could come out of nothing and that there must be something more conscious behind all that we see around us. But Krishna says in the 16th chapter of Gita that those whose sinful reactions are not extinguished, they will not be faithful. So the question arose in my mind that we're preaching these things to people, but to what extent will they catch it if their sinful reactions are not exhausted? It seems like those whose sinful reactions are somewhat exhausted, who are a little bit more pious, they will accept.
But there's the Krishna principle. They call it the God principle. There's the Krishna principle also. Krishna can bestow his mercy. When the devotee shows mercy upon the non-devotees, then Krishna he becomes merciful. He just bestows his mercy because the devotee wants this person to be helped. Just like the story of Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu and the Shringadev. After the whole episode was over and Hiranyakashipu got ripped apart, and Lord Nrsingadev said to Prahlad, I'm so pleased with you. You're such a wonderful, you've underwent so many struggles and so much pain for me. I want to repay, I want to give you some. So all that Prahlad could ask for was that his father get liberation. That was the best thing. And the Nrsingadev said, yes, I've already given that. Because he knows the mind of his devotee. He knows his devotee is thinking compassionately for the fallen souls. Therefore, he wants to. That's the principle of book distribution, isn't it? That the devotee is out there, approaching everybody and carrying these books and trying his best and taking insults and performing austerities. But the Lord is pleased by that, so then He allows people that are not even qualified in many ways. He makes their qualification because He's pleased by the devotees' attempts. So it's a relationship between the devotee and Krishna. And the karmis, the non-devotees, fortunately, they get into the play. They're drafted. Okay, you come and play this part. Play the part. And then they become heroes. They become stars. Because they got to play the part. They play a very important part in the whole Sankirtan movement. Imagine if there were no conditioned souls. It's a wonderful, they play, in a sense, the most important roles. And they become great heroes and heroines. Any other? Okay, thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Shri Kishore Kishori ki jai.